new families in our community. So, this is a fun Sunday, not only to have our bells, but to have a baptism and to have all the energy and beauty that's all around us. So here we are, again, in week 2 of Lent, of the sermon series, Where Your Heart Is, to kind of think through the stories we tell ourselves, the stories we tell one another about who we are. And as you know, I've been watching with excitement and anticipation what I like to call the days of our nest. The Eagles, the Eagle couple, Jackie and Shadow. Anyone know them? They're at Big Bear, and there's a camera that goes right on them. And I know it's not just me, like 100,000 people were watching with me the other day, so I know it's not just me. And we are watching the Eagles out of Big Bear. I'm from California, and they have a camera right on the nest. And so this little eagle couple, I wouldn't say little because they're probably really big eagles, Jackie and Shadow have been together for a number of years. And the last 2 years, they haven't hatched eggs, or the eggs have not, the chicks have not, gone to adulthood. So this year, 3 eggs hatched, and we've been watching in anticipation of this. Am I the only one, though, really? I feel like I saw some nods. I saw some nods, okay. It's a good diversion. It's a wholesome diversion, right? So when I wake up, I turn it on, the cats like it. It's just a whole thing, right? So until I woke up this weekend, on Saturday, well, I wake up every day, but on Saturday was the day this is on, and the snow had been fierce. So for 2 days, there's been a terrible snowstorm up in Big Bear. Snow, wind, you watched it on Friday that the nest was like kind of rocking, and my goodness, Jackie and Shadow take turns, and they are faithful on that nest, right, keeping those eagles warm. But unfortunately, we got the news yesterday that one of them didn't make it. So we went from 3 eaglets to 2 eaglets, and a country mourns. Well, people from a country mourn. And, it reminds us that nature can be tough. And while we sometimes innocently enough project kind of our hopes and cares and our emotions onto them, right? Eagles aren't singing their kids lullabies or reading them bedtime stories. They are just doing the best they can to keep their little ones surviving so that they can live on. There will be more eagles. Because we know that bedtime stories are for humans. We are the only species that sort of goes beyond the safety of food and our young. We help them learn by telling them stories. We share who we are through stories and our connections. We share our hearts to the best of our abilities so that kids can grow wise and mature like Jesus. And in so many ways, that is the best part of faith. That is the best part of church. Church ultimately is sharing ancient stories that were thousands of years ago, hopefully giving you some modern context, and reminding ourselves that the world can find goodness and forgiveness and grace, and that when we confess, we are met with a God who loves us and enfolds us into the community. We need to be reminded that we matter and that we are loved. So this is one of the stories today that was read, again, a while ago. You probably forgot it because the baptism was so adorable, but Hank, bring it back in. Good job, John, reading it. But this is one of those stories we get, one of the only stories we get of Jesus as sort of a teenager or an adolescence. I don't know about you, but I grew up evangelical, going to lots of youth camps. So I can't even count the number of times that was preached at me, right? Like, this is the seminal text you use as a youth preacher in a big, venue with lots of youth. And of course, the message was always, see, kids, even Jesus obeyed his parents. Yeah. Simple. Now that I'm older, maybe a little too simple, right? It's always been a fascinating text. It isn't in all the Gospels, because for most of the larger story, in all of the Gospels, we get Jesus' life mostly as an adult, as we should, right? In Matthew and Luke, we have a baby, and then very soon after that, he is an adult. And Luke is the only one that does this sort of transitional story. For the Gospel of Mark, we just meet Jesus like he fell down from the sky. There's no baby, there's no kids, there's no parents. And of course, as I like to say in the Gospel of John, John just does his own thing. John's weird. Starts from like the beginning of the world, right? So we get very few stories in between. So Jesus, for most of us, goes from helpless to helper, from napping to leading, and from being talked about to being the one talking. So what is up with this story, and what context is important for our fuller, more nuanced understanding of it today? We often interpret it in light of first century Second Temple Judaism, which makes sense. It helps us understand, again, like I said, his immediate family and his wider family, Mary and Joseph, were faithful members of their faith community, doing even the hard parts of observance of worship. Not everyone went to Jerusalem for these things. Really faithful Jews did. So we know that Jesus was surrounded in faith. Jesus spent time discussing and understanding his faith before he began his adult ministry as a teacher, right? So for years before, he confronts hypocrisy and shortcomings and really, I would say, let a lot of those Jewish leaders have it later in his life, right? He's learning. We see this. Because before you can teach, you need to be teachable. You need to be taught by others. We know of the situation that in Jerusalem, it was packed with faithful Jewish families from all over the world. They traveled far to celebrate Passover in a big way, and it was this big week-long celebration. So while I try to get you out of you in about an hour, I try to get you out of here, no. First century, it was week. It was a week. It was hours and hours and hours. People would travel together to avoid danger, right? And the entire group had to watch each other's kids, right? It was, as we like to say, it was a tribe. The tribe is what was needed, a village to raise your kids. First century family life was big and full. Again, kids were raised by a village, as they say. Jesus, being forgotten, feels like he was sort of kicked out of the safety of the nest. Or sometimes I've used the Home Alone story as an analogy, right? Oops, left behind, right? But in truth, it really wasn't like that at all. If you didn't see your kids, that was probably normal, as they were probably off with the other kids and other adults trusted watching them. So you're in a big caravan, and your kids don't just walk by your side, they want to hang out with the other kids, right? There's no kids in here now, but I think they would all agree, right? They want to hang out, not with the adults. The only shock of all of this in this story is that he wasn't found with the other kids, right? That's why the story is sort of unusual. And that's why I think it's written down. He wasn't roaming around the other kids, and they all got lost. He was off on his own with adults in a place that he knew very well. Luke, as I reminded us earlier, didn't primarily write this gospel in the book of Acts for just the Jewish audience. Again, when I say Jewish, I mean the first century Second Temple Judaism, right? Which he was steeped in. He was more interested in writing the gospel stories down actually for a Gentile audience, an audience living abroad in Asia Minor, a Greco-Roman sensibility. In other words, Jesus' story is religious, but also culturally significant to Luke. And so we get this story where Luke is lifting up Jesus as a young scholar, able to speak and stand toe-to-toe with the theological teachers of his day. He impresses them all, in fact, right? Which shocks them as it's supposed to shock us. But this is not merely a story to note in that way, but it is a crafted story that harkens back to leaders and heroes of his day. Like I said earlier, emperors and the powerful often not only were seen as sort of godlike, but also had these unusual origin stories. And also had stories of unusual impressive skill or insight as they began to become adults. So what is King David's unusual story? David and Goliath, right? Like in history, in the ancient texts, but also in the Greek and Roman culture, emperors, people that of note, have these heroic stories. They bow at the age of 12 or 13. They're coming into their own, and it makes them seem otherworldly, right? Augustus is not just a leader. No, he was ordained into it. Just look at his childhood. It paves the way for his leadership. And in the same way, we are supposed to see Jesus as this sort of God-ordained, foretold leader, impressive and extraordinary. When recounting the lives of major figures in antiquity and literature, again, often included these sorts of unusual big stories. Luke's birth and childhood narratives play this role, among others, and it's this: to assure readers and listeners that the hand of God guiding Jesus was there from the very beginning. And it's also, I think, a funny moment to remind us that Jesus was even sassy towards his mom, right? Now we get Mary, she's angry, rightly so. She's not angry, but what is she? She's afraid, right? She's afraid. Not only because he couldn't be found, right? but because it took them a while to find him. So I don't know about you, but if your parents are looking for you for more than like 15 minutes, you are in for it. Am I right? Yeah, you are in for it. But it's interesting to think through what it means for him to be difficult. Because I imagine Mary was wandering around going, why is Jesus so difficult? I wonder if this was something that happened a lot or was unusual, that she just couldn't find him, and then the kids were playing and he was like talking about, an ancient word in the text. I don't know. But I know that she comes to him and she's very frustrated, right? Why are you being so difficult? Jesus, we looked for you. It was really, really hard. And Jesus says, I'm sorry. Now he says, why didn't you look for me in the right place? You knew I would be here. I don't know if they did, because it seems to kind of insinuate they didn't quite understand. But we get a sense that Jesus from the very beginning knew there was something more to his life. And so this is more than sass, I think. It's Luke setting up a dynamic where we realize that Jesus is aware of his own role in human history, that his role is bigger than he even thinks it is. His story is divinely epic. But we do get to see him obey his parents, right? He does go with them. And again, I feel like that was the only part of the story I was ever told as a teenager, ironically. Obey your parents. Even Jesus did. But we should get to remind ourselves we're seeing Jesus here in a new way. We are reminded that we are never too old or too young to be passionate about the things that we're treasuring in our hearts. That our passions never, ever, ever are something that we should look away from. That no matter who we are, we have a way that God has made us be, and we should lean into it. And regardless of our passions and gifts, we are still members of our families and need to rest in that nurture and care. So it's not just that he at 12 went, I know everything, and kept going, right? No, he went back to his parents and thought, I still have some few things to learn, right? Which is hard as a teenager. I knew when I was a teenager, I thought I knew everything. And it wasn't until my late 20s, probably a little late, where I was like, oh, I think my parents knew some stuff too. Yeah, here we go. Jesus knew at 12 he wasn't ready, but he knew he was preparing for something big. And I think the last few lines are key for us in this time. Mary pondered these things in her heart. She bore witness. How do you think Luke knows the story? Who do you think told Luke this story? Right? She pondered this in her heart. And the reminder that Jesus grew in wisdom and stature, he gained insight and maturity, he grew in favor with God and humans, meaning he was well liked, and he did good, and he was kind. And I think there's something about that sort of leadership, that sort of family life, that reminds us, again, that sometimes we live in times like today where leadership and some folks who talk about leading can claim that it's okay to be cutthroat, right? That we can be cruel in order to get something done. To be empathetic maybe is weak. To do the right thing with no personal gain is super unwise. And to be kind is a waste of time. Sometimes we hear those views and visions of leadership, but Jesus didn't do it that way. We have more than just instinct. We're more than just eagles, right? We're not the wilds of the animal kingdom. Because that little eaglet probably perished. Didn't perish because of ill intentions. We tend, again, project sort of emotional intelligence onto these two eagles, and I do it too. And some animals certainly do attach themselves and feel feelings and feel sadness. We know that, bonded animals. But we also know there's a sense of survival of the fittest, right? It isn't sinister or mean-spirited. Sometimes not all the little babies make it. Because while our storytelling is one of the major things that sets us apart from the animal world, that's a double-edged sword, right? We can tell stories of life and goodness and empathy that teach our children the way to be, who they are, who we are. But we can also tell stories of bigotry or propaganda or disdain or say things that diminish the humanity of others. Sometimes the stories we tell allow us to do horrible and terrible things. Sometimes the stories we tell ourselves in the world are simply an excuse to allow more fear to envelop us. And so to me, that is why church is important, why a church community, whatever community you're going to be in, it's important that you connect in. because it's a place where we will tell stories of faith, certainly difficulty to be sure. There's pain and loss, and there's tough things in Scripture. But also what we will lift up is resilience and grace and forgiveness and goodness and mercy and courage. Remember, Mary pondered these things in her heart. We tell our stories to bear witness to the past and bring the lessons to us today. And Mary pondered these things in her heart. And we know this story, probably again because Mary told it. I mean, how could she not? I imagine her telling it with sort of a fake frustration. Do you want to hear the story about Jesus, the time I lost him? Oh, that boy, you know? But I think she had a glimmer in her eye, right? Because she sort of knew something else was going on. He was found in the temple after all. But I wonder if she ended it with, can you even with Jesus? I know people like him and follow him now, but he was a precocious kid. You remember to tell the stories, because Mary pondered these things in her heart. And so whenever it feels like the strong are winning, are kicking the weak out of the nest, this belabored metaphor, or it's a cutthroat world or survival of the fittest, in those moments it can feel daunting. The world's grief and pain and difficulty can be enormous. But like Mary, we can ponder these things in our hearts and remember to tell the stories that we have put away in those moments. I can tell you the story of spending a summer in Cambodia working with World Relief and all the good that it did there, and I did it online. And we can tell the story of neighbors and friends who are immigrants and refugees and sort of make the stories true, because the story then makes less about them and us and makes it about we as a community. We can speak about senior citizens who don't live too far from here, who live on Social Security and can't do without it, and we can say their stories, we can tell their names. And we can also tell of a Savior who loved the world so much that he spoke out in such a way that his life was to perish at the end of it. We tell those stories and we give them away. We do more than ponder them in our hearts. We tell the stories of our hearts. We release what we carry around into the world for goodness and grace. We tell the stories of beauty and love and goodness and truth, because I think those stories are going to save us and help us. I think the best thing we do is tell the stories to one another so that we can find empathy and grace and care for those people we don't know, but become we in those stories. So my prayer is that you will ponder these things in your heart, and like Mary, you will tell the stories for generations to come. May it be so. Amen.